Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of What's Next. As you can tell by the gigantic smile on my face, I am super excited to have our next guest on. And I will not be doing this justice without saying he is probably a guy you have not heard a lot about, maybe even if you're in the golf industry, but he is quite possibly the most influential and important guy in the business because of what his companies do these days. And I think more than anything, his willingness to share some insights, as he has done for me, both in a friendship and mentorship role, have meant a lot, just as I've grown as a businessman and father and husband. So I think you're really going to enjoy our next guest, Brian Verdugo. Brian, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
All right. So I'm going to open up with a couple just the house cleaning things. San Diego State grad, go Aztecs, right? Also San Diego State grad. Got to love that. Founded your company right after. We're going to talk about that transition. iGolf. You've got Synkwise. You got Location Capital, which is an investment firm that kind of looks back into the companies that I think you've had a good experience in investing in. Father of a great young kid. You and your wife living in downtown San Diego. I mean, I sort of love every time we get together about the stories. But there was one thing in your bio that I thought was really interesting. I'm laughing because I'm going to read it again. It is that you love playing the game of golf in a healthy, non-obsessive way. I read that and I thought, number one, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about when you say that. So maybe let's kick it off with that. Like, how in the world do you play golf in a healthy, non-obsessive way? Or what does that even mean to you?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of that means is that I take the game seriously in a different way than most people do. So I enjoy the game. I love the game. But I love the game to be around my friends, our partners, customers. I enjoy the game from a more social aspect than necessarily driving myself to being an extremely good golfer. And so because of that, I have a little bit of a different perspective on the game of golf. I enjoy listening to music. I enjoy having a beer with my buddies and smoking cigars and doing kind of that aspect of it. I still will challenge myself, but the fun of it for me is more getting away from kind of the daily grind of everything going on in my life and getting out and enjoying being outdoors and hitting golf balls and making fun of my buddies and then making fun of myself and having that whole kind of banter back and forth. It's just a different look at golf. And I've always said there will be a time and a place in my life that I can dedicate, I think, from a training perspective, really being serious about golf. But until I'm there, I need to find a way to enjoy the game of golf. And so that's kind of why I enjoy golf the way that I enjoy it.
Man. All right. Well, you nailed it. I mean, you're walking the walk and talking the talk. You and I are going to have to work on that in my game because I enjoy the beers, enjoy the banter with the buddies. It just kind of gets amped up for me. So I will follow your lead. And I forgot to mention also, Brian's a licensed pilot. So loves to fly. And I think as you kind of hear his attention to detail along the way, you're going to get some of why that seems to fit so well. So Brian, both of us SoCal kids, you grew up in Laguna Niguel. I grew up in Dana Point. We weren't too far from each other, although based on the snow on top of the mountains here, I'm a little bit older than you. What was life like for you and our audience, ex-pro athletes, current pro athletes, high performers, people that I think are saying, hey, what's next for me, right? If I'm going to go into this world of entrepreneurial, did I look like you guys early? Didn't I? I mean, it comes in all shapes, sizes, and forms, but what was life like for you before, let's say, iGolf? Did you have this entrepreneurial bug as a kid? Not at all. Like, where was that for you? Maybe even before you went to San Diego State or during San Diego State?
Yeah, I think growing up, I was always kind of known as the kid on the street that was building the next bike ramp or some fort or something like that. My two main things were I love sports and I love building stuff. And so I think at a young age, for me, it was the idea that every weekend it was like, right, this is an opportunity now to go and figure out what we're going to build. And a lot of our friends would come over and they'd wait. And it was like, okay, well, what is this skateboard ramp going to look like? And I think this is the time also in an era where parents kind of allowed you, they'd look at the skate ramp you just built or the bike ramp or some fort and they'd go, you guys are probably going to learn a hard lesson here. This is not going to work out well. But they, barring somebody who would get seriously injured, they'd go ahead and let us just go do it. And inevitably you'd come back with some pretty good cuts and scrapes and bruises, and every once in a while a broken arm or something like that. So for me, I think at a young age, that was a big deal. Was I enjoyed that aspect, and I always enjoyed the competitiveness as well. If we weren't building some bike ramp trying to see who could launch their bike off the highest, we were playing football in front of the backyard or front yard, or some other sport. We were playing baseball. So I think a lot of it was a combination between competitiveness, but also just this, inner desire to build things.
As our audience knows, this will be a bit like you and I having a couple of beers or a glass of scotch. And I'd say no real rhyme or reason, but certainly a reason to get to the meat of what we're talking about. I think for a lot of the guys and gals that I talk to that are in a stage where maybe have started a family, like I've got 23-year-old twins, so I've lived through it a little bit, but I'm still parenting adult children. So with your son, how do you, this kind of goes into the work-life balance thing. And I don't know that we need to go deep on that subject, but in today's environment, it seems almost impossible as a parent to do what you just said, right? Let the kids go play, let them build, let them take a couple of knocks. How do you do that with your son that you're like, yeah, I know from experience, I need to give him some of this healthy ability to expand his horizons, but we are in today's society that I just don't think affords us that opportunity much. How do you guys do it at home that you create that space for Rylan?
Yeah, one, he's 6 and almost 7 actually, but I'd say there's a lot of structure around things that he does. So he's been in sports from a young age. He absolutely loves baseball. He can tell you his favorite Padres players. He gets upset. He starts yelling at the TV. He's a Denver Broncos fan, which has been rough for the last couple of years for us. But he goes to the games. He knows a lot of the different players. He plays football. So there's a lot of structure, I think, around the sports events that we do with him. But then what we really try to do is allow him to, within that, go off and run off to the playground with his friends after the practice. A really good practice. He's focused. His friends are focused. They're doing well. And then I think we do a pretty good job with saying, okay, this is free time. This is playtime. Go run up the hill and go on the playground and do all the things that we did. It just may not be any more down the street at your buddy's house where at 6 years old, I got on my bike and just rode off. And my parents were like, well, make sure you're home by nighttime for dinner. Yep. We don't, that's not really a reality, unfortunately, for us today. And I think it's sad. And I think generations are going to suffer from that reality. But as parents, the best we can do is try to figure out that balance of how do you provide your child some structure, but never forget they're still children, and they need to have that ability to just go out and be a little boy and run around and roughhouse. And you're going to get a few licks every once in a while, and you're not going to always be happy about something. And sometimes you're going to be on the other end of that, and you need to work through that with them. That's not appropriate. So it's building character. I think it's a lot of those different pieces, but it's a more structured life than I think I grew up in. And it's trying to say, okay, this is structure. How do we kind of deconstruct that and allow him to still have some of the fundamentals that we got growing up?
Yeah, I'm going to add a word in here. Correct me if I'm sort of putting words in your mouth, but I think being intentional, right? I've heard you and your wife talk about everything from date night, our experiences together, to what you just mentioned, but I think it's brilliant. The intention there being, we're going to create some time after practice, which means we're not constantly looking at our watches saying, how do we get in the car right after this ends to get to the next thing? It's no, we need to create a buffer time. And I think it's an important nugget, right? Again, I want to put myself in the audience shoes of saying, okay, I get this thing about entrepreneurialism, working for myself. It feels like it's 100 hours a week, sometimes at a minimum. But if we do create these intentional moments, in this case with our kids, to your point, it's not going to go back to whenever it was, early 90s, but it's certainly going to at least take us to a spot where they can run up the hill, roughhouse a little bit, and be kids, right?
Absolutely. And one thing that I would also say is that it's different, right? Every generation has different experiences going to go through. And I think it's the generation having the children and their parents' generation, the grandparents' generation, to help, guide through that and do the best you can as parents. And I think that's a really important piece. But one thing I would note on this is that there is nothing I have done in my career, not one thing, that gets even close to measuring to those moments I get with my son. I mean, it's like there is no question that I would give up everything for him. And so I have to remind myself of that when I am traveling a lot and visiting our employees and our partners in multiple offices around the world. But every one of those experiences still don't even get close to the time I get to spend throwing a baseball with him, or taking him to a baseball game, or just sitting next to him and working through reading, getting him to understand that this is not necessarily fun. This is work. This is discipline. But when he gets it, it's that smile that they have on their face. And as a parent, you don't understand it until you have a child, but it's a gift. And it is just that much more important than my career. No matter what I do in my career, that's still going to be the highlight of my life.
Well, and I can say personally, folks, that having known Brian for many years here, I think some people give that a little bit of lip service. Totally not the case here, right? I mean, it's your love for that time is very evident by how you protect it, first and foremost, which I think is really good. Your ability, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, and I want to know how you've learned to do it well. Your ability to say no to the things so that you can say yes to others. And this is certainly one of those key components, the time with your son. And this is the genesis of the show, right? It isn't just here's a how-to on go do business for yourself. It's how do we do this and be happy and successful? And that doesn't mean X amount in the bank or X house. It's how do you have something where your kids are happy to see you and that you've managed that time? So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think those are the sort of real raw moments that create these nuggets of learning that say, okay, good. I can read about working hard, but when you really put it in context of why are you doing that, it's so that you have more time to enjoy those kind of things. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I think you and I first got connected because of maybe San Diego State, but you'd shared with me a story, like you had an invention at San Diego State that I believe was the genesis of iGolf. And this is going to date you. It very much dates me, but kind of walk us through what was that? What were you thinking? Kind of what happened there that I think really is and fill us in on what started iGolf, and maybe what is iGolf, so that we can kind of transition into what is it that you do and why is it so important in our industry?
Sure. So at San Diego State, I had kind of the rare opportunity to start a company, which I don't think a lot of people I was around did. And I managed still to have a lot of fun and enjoy my life and have a lot of friends and do all that stuff. That started a company, and it was around database design tool sets. And it actually had nothing to do with the industry of golf. It morphed into another project that ultimately became what we know as iGolf today. But we sold that off. And what kind of led to the next phase was I realized all of my friends were going to be going away to go work, and they were going away to work in companies. And they had these on one hand, it was structured, they were making money and they were enjoying it. On the other hand, it became very evident this was not a path I was ever interested in. And I was already in a fortunate situation that I had made some money. So it gave me the ability to start to do some of the things that I wanted to do. And those things were, I wanted to learn how to play golf. I wanted to be a pilot, and I loved being out on boats. And so the culmination of those, what I would consider are more hobbies, but again, hobbies that you have to have discipline and structure and focus, that actually is what led from being flying and boating. That's kind of what led to this concept around GPS for golf. And at the time, it really didn't exist. I mean, you had lasers, big bulky lasers, and you had these kind of golf cart looking old TVs mounted. But from a consumer standpoint, they didn't really have anything. And so it was just kind of one of these, I'm flying and I'm boating, I'm using GPS. Why can't we have something like this on a golf course? And so that was the progression from coming out of San Diego State and realizing that I wanted to do something else. I just didn't know exactly what it was I was going to do. And this is my early 20s. So I kind of fell ultimately into this. And once it became something that was more of a hobby to an idea, that then morphed from an idea into talking with people and going out and asking people their opinion on it, it became evident there was something there. And then it just came down to whether or not I was willing to give up some of the play time that I was having and focus on this, or whether I was going to say, no, thank you. And it worked out. It's been quite a ride for 20 something years.
So iGolf is, I think for our viewers, the easiest way I describe it, and then you can fill in the details here. I mean, you guys have, I think, over 40,000 golf courses now mapped, thousands of data points, if not more, per golf course. You control all of that data from an accuracy point of view. And I know we've used that personally at V1 Sports, and it's amazing, right? The accuracy, the detail, not to mention that's data. And then you've got your team that provides the customer service and the right fit. But you guys are kind of behind the scenes managing all of that data so that our laser range finders, our watches, our whatever that says it's 146 to the front, it's 155 to the back, or 165 to the back. You guys manage and map all that data. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly it. In fact, if you kind of back up just a little bit, a lot of people don't know that golf GPS for consumers, that now we have watches and we have handhelds and we have speakers and they're in all the golf cars and everything else. They actually, the technology started on a Palm Pilot, Palm handheld, which again will date me on that 20 something years back. But at the time, Palm Pilot and another company called Handspring, they were the industry leaders for what we would now know as smartphones. And I had one because it was a planner for me. And rather than having to physically write down my schedule, the Palm Pilot was a great tool. It had a slot on it, and that slot is what we were able to put GPS into. And we just wrote a simple app for the Palm Pilot that used the GPS receiver. And that's actually kind of, again, it's where it all started. And from there, the one thing that when we would go out and use it, it was a great tool, but we would talk to people and they'd say, this is amazing. We love this. How do I buy one? And it was, well, okay, you got to buy a Palm Pilot and I have to buy this. And then when you get all that, hey, just go out and map your golf course. And that's when people went, no, you map my golf course, call me when there's a product available. I'm buying the product, but I'm not going to do this on my own. And so that was kind of that day where it became I have to either commit to this is a serious business and we're going to go do it. And that is where we ended up mapping 40,000 golf courses over the course of, I think it took 10 years of mapping. And then you have to keep up with technology because Palm Pilots moved into real handhelds and watches. And then the real smartphones came out with both Apple and Android. And now you have a lot more technology, right? So we had to go from just simple data to where are the trees on a course? What is the water? What kind of grass is it? So the data set that we had to build became massive. And ultimately, that's what we did. And we still do that today. And now all sectors, launch monitor simulators, some of the best companies in the world, E6 is the kind of the gold standard of simulation software. They license it. And if you look at what they can do with our data, it's phenomenal. It's unbelievable. So everything from handhelds and, like I said, speakers and golf cars. And there's betting apps and different kinds of mobile apps and simulators. All of those companies use our data. And that's kind of what the progression has been. And we have to maintain that data set. And then we also need to build some intellectual property around how do you use that data set to make it, easier for our partners to get to market. That's a lot of what iGolf does.
So love the detail there. And I would say the pause point for this is my takeaway that sounds totally simple, but you recognized a need after you did some really cool tinkering with the Palm Pilot and somebody said, hey, that sounds cool, but if you go do it, I'll buy it, right? So I'm oversimplifying this. And then you go to companies that you work with, Blue Tees, Rad Golf, Yamaha, True, the USGA, just to name drop a few of your clients. They were pretty much saying the same thing. Look, we don't want to go out and do this individually. So if you can go get this data, and then, as you mentioned, create this overlay or interface so they can talk to whatever we're doing back at home, we'd gladly pay for it. And I think that's a really nice takeaway for anybody who's listening, specifically even outside of golf, if they want to start a business or have a business and optimize, is look in that industry and find out where you can essentially give somebody the easy button. Is that kind of I don't want to oversimplify it, but you created the easy button for golf course data. For sure.
Absolutely. And more than just an easy button was my intention for the company was never to build a brand. I wasn't interested in building hardware and a brand, but in order to get to where we are today, I had no choice. I had to build hardware and we had to initially build a brand, but we always knew we wanted to shed that and be a licensing IP company. And thankfully, this little company called Bushnell in the mid 2000s, I think 2006, 2007, they recognized that the laser market was going to be challenged. And at the time, he was their CFO, Blake Rapam, became their CEO. And he made the decision that he had two options. He could listen to his internal staff, say they could build whatever they thought they needed to build, or he could acquire and then take what somebody had already done and made work and then kind of build on top of that. And ultimately, that's what they did. They bought our hardware group in mid 2000s. I think it was 2007, 2008. They acquired our hardware group and they became customer number one from an IP license. And I don't know, it's 75 or something today, but they were customer number one. And it really, it did exactly what I was hoping, which was they know what they're good at. They were good at distribution, marketing, sales. They were not a technology company. And he recognized that early on. And I think then they've had a lot of success over the last 20 years. And that's a big part of this is I think what we try to do is we work with companies that recognize they have really core strengths, but in some areas they don't. And we want to make sure we provide that to them in a way in which makes it easier on their company to be good at what they do. And that's the biggest lesson for anybody running a company, right? I mean, be good at what you're doing. Don't go too horizontal, because a lot of times people, when they have success, they tend to think they can do everything and they can't. And then that snowballs into a lot of problems. And that's, like I said, that's kind of what our viewpoint is don't do that. Do what you're really good at.
Okay, so I usually reserve that question for later, but it just seems pretty obvious right now. That sounds like a superpower of iGolf that you guys have really recognized. We're going to go an inch wide and a mile deep here. We're going to stay in our lane. We're going to crush it. We're going to really just dominate this, solving the problem for our customer from a behind the scenes. And I think that also speaks to your personality. You're a guy who, I love being around you, but you're not the guy who's clamoring to get in front of a microphone on a podium at, whatever it is, or splash your name on the XYZ. You've been a really sort of cool behind the scenes guy who just gets a lot of shit done. Does your personality, and I'm giving you my take on it, you might say I'm fair crap, but does your personality immediately kind of fit that same mold? Is your superpower to find those solutions and then it transferred into your company and that's what your company does? Did it kind of work linearly like that?
I don't know. I'm not sure I could give you a simple answer on that. I think in some companies that we've either invested in or I've been part of, I recognize the need that I need to be out in front. And I don't mind being out in front when it's needed. But I also think, again, you have to recognize your place. And in iGolf's position, we need to recognize that our customers are ultimately the ones who, it's their customers that have the technology. They provide a solution to them. So it would be inexcusable for me to jump in front of them and try to tell the world, well, I'm actually the guy that's really smart and the company that you're using is not. And not a single one of our companies that we do business with that is even close to the reality. But it could become a perception, which is why my position has always been that I should stay behind the scenes. Our staff should stay behind the scenes. Very often, we don't always know what our customers are going to be doing. We're there to support them through that process to, again, aid them in where they're ultimately going. So I don't mind being out front when I need to, but at least for the sake of iGolf, I've always kind of maintained behind the scenes. And I think that's worked to the benefit of iGolf.
Yeah, and I'll sort of bend the rules here a little bit because I've spent a lot of time around you and your team, both as a customer and as a friend. And I would say you've done a really great job of the people that you hire in your company also take that sort of servant attitude, right? That they arrive with, how do we help? How do we prop you up, if you will? We understand you are the brand, we're support. And you get that from the very beginning. I've never once felt sort of railroaded. And I do believe that's part of the company's success because in a way you control, at least in our case, you controlled the most important thing, which was the accuracy of that data. And you did have the upper hand, but at no time was it ever flexed. And I felt like that really put us in a very good light at V1. And so I think as you've just described that, realizing your place, so I'm saying this for the audience, is you take inventory of kind of where you're at. If you've come from a high performer pro athlete in your company, wherever it is, typically you're out in front, getting that pat on the back, getting the attaboys. Sometimes, as Brian's talking about here, the idea of stepping back and realizing what is my place here to be the most successful. Not that you're stepping back to be second. It's just where can I step back to be the most successful? Obviously, you guys are crushing that at iGolf. So I think that's a really good fine point to put on the whole idea of this podcast, which is what are the things I can learn from guys like yourself who have been there and done that? Because we always talk about, I want experience, not opinion. And that's a really good example of an experience of having it done. So as we transition, I mean, we could spend the whole episode on iGolf. I just think it's fascinating, the data and where it's going. You get two other companies, probably among many others, but Synkwise and Location Capital. Synkwise about autonomous vehicles. Maybe as an overview, where are we going in that? And I'm saying that from a business owner's point of view, not so much in the industry where it's going, but as you see it and the things you've learned out iGolf, which is really kind of boots on the ground and data. And now you're putting that into actionable pieces of hardware in some cases, many cases. Where do you see that going that you'd say, okay, I took this experience and it's going here because here's where I see kind of the future of that industry going?
Sure. So I think Synkwise is a good example of where we've been fortunate to have a customer like Yamaha. And we've had, I mean, really very fortunately had good presidents over there that we've worked with for the last 7 or 8 years. And that kind of brought us into a vertical that I would consider has been pretty much untapped in what we're doing in that sector. I always say everybody races to the tier one, right? Everybody wants to be an autonomous, and that's what's sexy. And I like to use the analogy that you walk into a bar and there's always the most beautiful girl standing there, and you go with your buddies and you're sitting there and you watch what happens, and she gets bought 5 drinks, 10 drinks all night, and everybody goes over to her. But most of the time, she just kind of leaves and waves goodbye and smiles and walks out the back. But there's a lot of other really attractive girls in the bar who are fun and enjoyable, and you go over and you talk to them and you actually have a great evening. So I always talk about autonomous as kind of that way. Tier one is this beautiful, perfect model looking girl, but every single guy in the bar staring at her, and there's only one of her. Whereas there's all kinds of beautiful other women there too, and fun. And if you kind of go down a level a little bit, you go, wow, well, hey, there's a lot of opportunity over here. You start to realize this is going to be a fun night. And I think autonomy is the same way of what we're doing in Synkwise, which is we're focused a lot more on the tier two. So when we start looking at vehicles, we're looking at low speed vehicles. So we're looking at vehicles that need autonomy, but we're not talking about the car you're going down and buying at your local dealership. We're not talking about what Tesla's doing. We're not talking about even what Waymo's doing. I mean, those are hundreds of billions or $1 trillion market cap companies, and they're still trying to figure out how to get this stuff right. So again, I think a lot of this is Synkwise understood that there was a market need, and that's what we're focusing on right now. And again, Yamaha's been a flagship customer of ours, and we're really thankful to have a brand like them. But where I see a lot of this autonomy is solving true needs, not something that's a pipe dream. I'm not, again, Elon Musk is a brilliant person, but I'm not talking about trying to put people on Mars. That's for other people to do. And I'm looking at more of the practical reality of where the world is at today. And if we look at 3 to 5 years, how can autonomy be used practically in an environment that I think your average person will understand and want to use it? So we're looking at much more kind of micro level autonomy versus macro level autonomy. And that's, like I said, it's just been a good business model, and it's growing because rather than us looking way up here, we focused on something where there was truly a need. We focused our investment on that need, and I think we're succeeding right now.
Well, to me, the two big takeaways out of that, which clearly has been a recurring theme here, is that you look at sort of the immediate need that your team can go solve, again, inch wide, mile deep, and partnerships. I mean, we've heard you mention several times, it wasn't about me, us, it was us and our partners. And you mentioned several there. And so I think, again, another important takeaway is you don't have to go this alone. Anytime you can link up with a partner. And again, I have personal experience here. It's 1 + 1 = 5. because the partner is going to bring some thinking to this. They're looking to you for solutions. And obviously, Brian, you guys have started to knock that out of the park, and quite a long runway there. To your point, you're not putting somebody on Mars, but if you look at the next 3 to 5 years, application is almost endless, and quite a long runway for sure.
Yeah. And again, I think you touched on that too. It's partnerships and relationships. I mean, the individual at Bushnell who acquired our hardware group in the mid 2000s is still a very good friend of mine. We had maintained, even after they sold Bushnell, I've maintained a great relationship. Actually, we make wine together up in Napa Valley. Maintaining these relationships, in fact, not maintaining, building those relationships is the first step. The second part of that is that it's putting in the effort to maintain that relationship, regardless of whether that relationship has any immediate impact on your business, because you don't know where that relationship may go in the long run. And I think that's, again, a lot of what I would say I've seen success on my end has been starting at that level of building relationships with good people and then transitioning those relationships to long-term relationships, regardless of whether there's a business part to it, and maintaining that relationship because, like I said, you never know where that's going to go from there.
Totally. And I would say, again, for the audience, this is so counterculture today, which should perk your ears up to say, listen, today it is, if there's nothing in it for me, put it in the trash can, move on, go find something else. And I think you're hearing somebody tell you that over 20 years, build the relationship first, nurture it. Brian, you could probably give us 10 different examples of relationships you built and nurtured that don't equal anything. But yeah, I know in our industry, you've got really great nurtured relationships and partnerships financially, even between people that are competitive in the same industry. But your ability to kind of build those up, I think speaks to that exact thing, which is put the foundation in first. And again, nurture that over time because you just never know, right? And ultimately, the odds kind of tilt in your favor. Okay, transitioning over now, I look at, let's say you personally, you've had some great success in business, doing a lot of iconic work, not only in the industry, I think a lot of great work in the city of San Diego itself. You're at a point now that, what does it all mean, right? So is there going to be some legacy here beyond my own family? Maybe talk to us about, how do you think, or how do you and the family think, how do you and your wife think about giving back, legacy creation? What does that look like for you guys? And are there any examples of, this is kind of what we're doing now?
Again, the probably where I would start with that is, I think having really good parents, really good family helps. And not everybody is fortunate enough to have that. When I grew up, my parents, they came out of law school, they had no money. They had to pay off all their debt. They had kids. They were trying to figure out how to make all this work. But ironically, they still managed somehow through all of that to have a giving back kind of a nature. And whether it was time or whether it was actually money, they fundamentally believed in that you should be involved. You should be part of things. I remember fairly young, they made us do, I think it was Meals on Wheels, and it was to support, I think it was seniors that didn't have the ability to get food or to go get food. And you would, as a kid, you're sitting here saying, I have to go do this. And you would, but then you get so much out of it. I mean, you'd sit down with a senior who they didn't have any ability to leave. They don't have any family left. And you're sitting there and you bring them food, and then you sit there and you get to hear stories about their bring up. So I think from a young age, I was given that. My parents were very involved in Rotary. And so through the transition of my parents starting their businesses and then slowly but surely them getting to a point where they were doing well, it became overly clear by the time I was in high school that their businesses were doing well, but they were still very committed to the idea of giving back, being involved in community and charity. So for my lifetime, I think that's always been kind of ingrained, and it just puts a lot of perspective. I mean, it's like having a child. It puts a different spin on things, but it breaks my heart when you hear things like these kids don't have 3 meals a day. So I think from a charity standpoint, it's important because it's different. I always say that business is to return capital to shareholders. It is not a social experiment. when you take money from people to build a business, you need to remember that it's your responsibility to maintain that money with an ethical position, but to be a good person with that money from a business perspective, return capital to people build. It is not there to be a social experiment. Social experiments are where you should be looking at charity. I think it is extremely important for leaders of companies that are successful to do that, to understand that is an important piece of the puzzle to do well in business. Use then a portion of that money to give back to charities, to your local community, or to other things. And sometimes it's time. Sometimes it's not even just money. It's a combination of both. But in my lifetime, that's been really important to me. I chaired the American Cancer Society for San Diego for a couple of years. And again, it's one of those things that I've had family go through cancer. And so it's a near and dear thing to me. And sadly, as I get older, you see it more and more. And so there are things like that I think they're just important, and you should take time.
Well, boys, I mean, again, that could be a whole episode, right? First of all, having gone through throat cancer in San Diego, indebted to the work there for sure. I heard the word stewardship, both in business, returning equity to shareholders, and essentially returning your time, treasure, and talents to your community, right? I think that's, to your point, sometimes money is not the thing you have. You referenced your parents, where probably paying off some pretty massive student loans to get through school, but still being civic in their gifts back to the community. And I would say to the audience, if you did not come from a situation where you had it modeled, because I think that is the best version, right? As parents, we try to model for our kids what to do next. Brian, you had a great example of that. And we could do a whole episode probably on your grandfather, who also gave you this awesome vision of what that looked like to be an entrepreneur. But if that isn't your past, start the legacy, right? I mean, I try not to should you into anything, but if you want to hear, as you have over these episodes of time and time again, somebody saw it first through a mentor, through a parent, through a grandparent. If you haven't had that, then be that, right? So get that started, because that idea of stewardship, it's as old as time, right? It's both biblical and human nature. So be a good steward of the financial side for sure, but also of your time, because it can be such a valuable.
And to interject on that too, I think when you find something that is, again, a charitable contribution to society, and you get into it, you start to realize, well, they need more. And okay, well, if they need more, then I need to do better over here, right? So but now I have another purpose, right? I'm going to focus now a little bit more on trying to do even better here, not because I want to add a car to a collection or another whatever. It's, this really touched me over here, and I really want to make sure that they have what they need. I'm going to focus a little bit more energy over here and be better at what I'm doing in the business, because again, if I'm really good at the business side of it and I'm focused on making money in the business, I can give more than into the community or the charities or whatever I want to be able to give back to. So I think they actually go hand in hand. I mean, when you've had a moment where you realize this is really important to me and to people around me, it motivates me then to get really back in the saddle on a business standpoint and do better there to be able to give more. So I think the two actually are very kind of hand in hand.
So, man, this is awesome, because there's this belief, again, social norm today, which is who you are Monday through Friday doesn't necessarily, it's not who you are on Saturday and Sunday. So you unplug one to become another. But I think what we've clearly heard from you is whether it's how you're a parent, how you're running your company, or how you're thinking about civic endeavors, I'm going to dig in here a little bit harder because I'm motivated to do that so that I get more time with my son, so that I get more time with my wife, so that I can invest more time, money, energy into my civic endeavors, where you're the same guy Tuesday that you are Saturday. And I do know that about you personally, so I'm stating the obvious between you and I, but I think for those that don't know you, but I'm hopefully going to use you as an example of here's what to do, right? So when you see culture going this way, look in this other direction. Here's a guy that is walking the walk, talking the talk, and doing it Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever day, you're going to get the same thing. And I think that's what ultimately leads to, yeah, it's a driver for you, but it's kind of the same whether you're at home or at work. So I appreciate you pointing that out. I think it's a really important.
And again, excuse the frustration on this stuff, but ignorance is just something I'll never understand. I mean, you mentioned athletes. You were an athlete. And I'm sorry, I never heard of a single athlete in the world that said, well, I'm going to work really hard Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but Saturday and Sunday, I'm just not going to work. Hey, you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. You're never going to be a professional athlete. You're probably never going to get to college athletics. So again, it's ignorant. And I think we live in a society today that we are unfortunately surrounded by people who they prophesize almost on what they want the world to look like, but it's not the real world. If you want to be great at something, you got to wake up every single day and want to be great at it. You don't get to just choose the days you want to be great at it and then the days you don't. So again, for anybody who has been successful at something, I'm sorry, I do not buy into the idea of that new kind of normalized world people want to live in. You need to wake up every single day and it has to be, it's a discipline. You have to want it. And if you don't want it, don't do it, right? I mean, just do not be involved in it because you're only going to disappoint yourself and other people around you. And that doesn't ever lead to anything good in society for yourself, your family, or anybody around you.
Well, music to my ears as evidenced by my smile. And I'm hoping for most of our listeners who would say, okay, you've just described me. I'm a hard charger. I'm a thoroughbred. What you've just emphasized is take that from your current environment. If you're thinking about going into business or if you've already made that leap and now you're hitting maybe a milestone or you're hitting the ceiling a little bit, continue to work hard, right? I think what Brian's saying here is exactly that. Success comes with overalls and it looks like hard work. It's just true, right? We can talk about all these life hacks and shortcuts and all the bullshit that gets espoused not only in social media, but in sort of general population. It's quite frankly not true, right? You might stumble onto something there, but if you really want to ensure that you're going to have long-term success, it looks like hard work. And I appreciate you bringing that up. All right, Brian, as we wrap here, I typically pick a couple of questions to ask. One of them is, do you believe in luck, right? Through the course of your professional career, do you believe in luck? And if so, or if not, why?
Oh, without any doubt. I mean, I don't think I would be hard pressed to say anybody that's been successful in this world, if they're genuinely honest, would tell you that luck is not one of the pieces. I would say in technology, you have a few fundamental pillars. You have to have great technology. You have to have a great work ethic, and you have to have luck. Because the reality is that for every Google and every Meta and every other company out there that people always want to look at and say, look at these, they're $1 billion or $1 trillion and this kind of stuff. For every one of them, there was probably 100, 1,000, 10,000 companies that had better technology and harder workers. They just didn't have the luck piece. And so I think we discount that as something because we tend to think of it as it's a negative, and it's not a negative. Luck is also something in which if you put yourself in positions to be lucky, then you are more likely to get lucky. If you don't put yourself in positions to be lucky, you're probably not going to be lucky. I always use it for golf with a hole-in-one. Here's the reality. If you don't play a lot of golf and you don't really care about getting a hole-in-one and you don't take every par three seriously, you are diminishing your luck. It doesn't matter how much skill you have, you're diminishing your luck. And getting a hole-in-one, no matter what anybody says, is a massive portion of luck. Now, if you are a very good golfer, you probably have a higher likelihood of success of getting a hole-in-one. But there's golfers who are scratch golfers, plus golfers, that have never gotten a hole-in-one in their life.
I played 40 years and had my first one 3 Sundays ago, to your point exactly. I've played for 40 years and had my first hole-in-one. It took a little luck.
And you're a good golfer. What is your handicap?
I'm a 3.
Okay. So, I mean, by all standards of golf, you are a great golfer. And it took you, 40 years to get your first hole-in-one. And so again, I go back to this from a business perspective. I think those are very important pieces of it, but luck is a big piece of it. and don't discount that. Wherever you are, I don't care what you're doing in your life, luck is a portion of success. It is not the driving reason for success. It is a portion for success. And again, put yourself in a position to be more likely to have that luck, and you will more likely get that luck. And I think in general, that's just, it goes back to discipline. It goes back to work ethic. It goes back to getting up every day and saying, I am not a 4 or a 5 day a week person. I am a 7 day a week for things that I love to do.
Well, I was just encouraged by Brian Feeney, who's also in San Diego, to reread Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And I love the way he says this. And it's why I asked the question, because I don't think it's universally held, but those who believe what you do, probably on both sides, I have yet to meet anybody I don't believe in luck at all. But the luck is out there for everybody, and it is searching for the person searching for it, right? Without getting too metaphysical.
Yeah.
Luck is out there looking for you. Are you climbing the ladder high enough to put your head up in a spot that you're like, hey, come find me? Or are you way down in the bottom complaining, to your point, not taking part 3 seriously, using that example? Because if you're not looking for it, it just doesn't find you.
Right.
That's why when lottery winners win it, right? And the statistics of over 81% of them being broke or back to paycheck within 3 years, because luck found them and they didn't know what to do with it. They honestly didn't. So I think I appreciate your perspective on that. And I think as business owners, it's, yes, there is luck, an element of it. I think you've heard that from literally 100% of the guests in the show so far, and probably will in the future. And where it is, are you looking for it? And are you putting yourself in a position to act upon it when it finds you? Right. So,
and that's then there's nothing wrong with luck. And I think that's one of the things that I would always go back and say is that I like actually starting stories off about business, about the luck piece. And I remind people through the story, there was a lot of hard work and there was a lot of good people involved. But without that stroke of luck too, a lot of things that I had done never would have materialized. And that goes on and on, right? That's not just, if you run a company for a long period of time, you'll recognize that is also an important part of running a business. It's just that you have to rethink that. You have to reinvent that. And again, while you're going through that, luck sometimes is going to be a driving piece of the new success you're going to have. And you should celebrate that.
Well, we're going to do a mic drop right there. I would say, folks, if you like I do, this idea of the Intel Inside story, iGolf at its foundation is not a company that's out there beating its chest of they're the biggest and the baddest, but behind the scenes they are. I know that you can follow them on iGolf.com. You can follow the companies that they use. I mentioned some of them. We'll have their names in the show notes below. Brian, any other places you'd point people to that you've kind of enjoyed either getting some business information, advice, any of the things you might listen to or read, just kind of as a final takeaway?
I mean, I try to keep up. I like LinkedIn from a standpoint of just it's getting better and better with the ability to understand what you're looking for and reading on. So I tend to like to read direct from people that are in industry. That's more where I tend to get what I would say is insight into directions of what we're doing. But I honestly would tell you that the majority of the time I enjoy spending is I enjoy spending time with people like you. When you're in San Diego, we make time to get together, and you have a perspective and an understanding of things that I don't necessarily have. And so what I would say to everybody is that the place I want to get the most from is always trying to surround myself around people who I can learn from every single day. And that to me it's why I maintain relationships. It's why I work so hard at making sure that I keep in touch with a lot of people. And so to me, I think if there's anything I would say, it's build that network, but build it genuinely. Don't build it because you want something from them, like you want to sell them something. Build those relationships from a core standpoint. The business will come, the money will come, but don't underestimate that time with people when you're just sitting around having conversations about life, because life, a vast portion of our lives are business, and learning about people's lives and how they got to where they're at and bouncing ideas off of them and asking them for their perspective is such an important piece of life, because you may not agree with it, but at least it gives you a perspective that it is a different way of looking at something than maybe you had thought about looking at it.
Well, folks, thanks for sticking in overtime here with us. We typically don't go this long, but it was worth it. I think, those things of an iteration and a belief that those relationships matter, not just for what we get right now, but later. Brian, you live it, which is awesome, right? A great example of that. Thank you for pointing that out. And everybody out there, if you like the show, as always, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, send us some notes of what we can do better, who else you'd love to see. You're probably going to hear a few of these clips over and over again. I think those are sort of timeless nuggets from Brian. Brian, thanks for being on the show, and we really appreciate you. Thanks for joining us on What's Next.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.